Welcome to Conversations Below the Surface, the CBS Podcast Shorts. I am your host, Marcus Gentry, and we hope you enjoy this episode. A friend and I were talking the other day, and he is in a different situation right now, without going into any great detail. And he said to me that it has become wise for him to not engage in every conversation that he hears people talking in. Matter of fact, he's discovered that it's best that he remains silent. Even though he may know answers or have information that could be helpful, it's best that he remains silent in certain situations in the environment that he's in. And to be more straightforward with it, he happens to be incarcerated at this time, and he's learned that wisdom. But that wisdom that he has learned, when he and I talked about it, I said, you know what, I'm going to do a short podcast about this because it's so critical. Because what this reminds me of is that just because you have the skill of communication does not mean that you need to be in every conversation. And he encouraged me to do that. So that's what this is about. Just because you can doesn't necessarily mean that you should. Now, I know this is going to date me, but there was a time a long time ago where people would use the statement, this is an A-B conversation, see your way out. Yeah, maybe it's considered corny or old, but there was a separation between certain people's conversation and your involvement. And sometimes they will let you know this is not a conversation for you. Sometimes they let you know that. Today, people don't always let you know that. And so just because you have the skill of communication doesn't mean you need to be in every conversation. But there are platforms set up that would seem to invite you into the conversation. And I'm talking largely about social media. And people will post their thoughts and ideas and opinions, and you will invite yourself into the conversation and start sharing your thoughts and opinions. And, well, I think you should do this, and I think you should say that. And a lot of times what happens, conflict erupts that spills out to your life because you have invited yourself into a conversation that you really didn't need to be in. Just because you may have the answer doesn't mean you need to interject your opinions, your thoughts, and ideas in every situation that's there. Sometimes it's wise to wait for an invite before you start talking and sharing what it is that you have to say. We live today in a very different time, and people's emotions are just under the skin. And you inviting yourself into a conversation without knowing the whole backstory could possibly create some complications. As a matter of fact, it's many stories that comes across the news where somebody sees an argument going between two people, a man and a woman usually, or sometimes it's two women or two men, and they insert themselves in that, and they end up becoming the one that gets injured. Now, this is not to suggest that we should not step up for someone who is being taken advantage of, or someone who has not developed their voice and you have a relationship with them and you're trying to help them out. So there are circumstances where it's okay for you to involve yourself, but not every conversation, not every situation that comes up. In fact, our greatest conversation probably needs to be with ourselves before we start trying to insert ourselves in another communication or another conversation just because we may think we have a good answer, a good solution. The real conversation may need to be with ourselves. How are we doing physically in all the key areas, physically with our physical well-being, things inside of our physical home? How are we doing? What are we communicating with ourselves about what we need to do? What about our emotions? How do we handle our emotions at this time? Are we communicating with ourselves about the best way to handle things for us in our lives? Finances. You're talking about how somebody else spends their money. How are you spending your money? What is the conversation you have with yourself? Moral decisions. We could probably, if we were really honest, look back in our lives and see things that in hindsight we realize that maybe that wasn't a good moral decision to make. Well, it's not just in hindsight. We're one decision away from making a misstep today. So it's important that we communicate with ourselves. Am I making good moral decisions for the highest good, for myself and for relationships that I'm involved in? We want to give relationship advice. What about the relationships that you're involved in, with the relationship with yourself, with your family, with your friends, with your significant other? When we are quick to engage in conversation that we see going on, or that we hear or we observe, that we are told about is going on, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Just because you may know some answers doesn't mean that you necessarily need to insert yourself in every conversation. The message is simple. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. See if the message can serve you well this day. Thank you for listening to this CBS Podcast Short. If you would like to hear more on this topic, please email me at respect@marcusgentry.com. And don't forget to check back for new episodes.